visualize this scene.
He took the second cup of liquid to his lips. Yeah, hey, ayahuasca, straight from South America. Chillin' with mestizos, Santo Daime, Jesucristos, into the next dimension. Hyperspace dialogue, man, not to mention. True samurai with the syllable slang. Listen up, open ears, let your mind go. Prop anonymous, y'all, breaking down the dough. Consciousness shining in void, a great radiance, radiating stadiums to standing room capacity. After me, the path will be drawn upon a map, while the fools stack food stamps and add their own tax. Perfectly, periods of packaging facts, percolate, impersonate the truth to manufacture whack. I'll stand back, stand tall, stand ground, watch the wind shake them down from the country to metropolis. Rise to the top, cause I know where the bottom is. Pawn the body politic, apply the acupressure. Meditate for years, all about the elders' lectures. Step into the stage with the tongue of a sage. I let myself get out the way, then I study the waves. It's like that, a matter of fact, beyond material. Some speak ethereal, some clarity crap. First step upon the path past the neophytes.
Right, ladies and gentlemen, here we are back again on the My Family Thinks I'm Crazy podcast, and I am absolutely stoked to have this gentleman here with me today. He is one of three hosts on the fantastic podcast Stoner Dadz. He also has his own podcast alongside his lovely wife called Two Jack Bros, and of course he is a comedian with a degree in economics. The great Sidney Gantt joins me here on the My Family Thinks I'm Crazy podcast. Sidney, how are you?
I'm doing very well, man. Thank you for having me. This is exciting.
Right on. I'm excited too. So for folks who don't know, Stoner Dadz is a really fun show, but you've been doing Two Jack Bros for a couple years, quite longer than Stoner Dadz. And what really hit me with Two Jack Bros is the chemistry of you and your lady. It really inspires me in my relationship to talk to my girlfriend and in a way that matches how I feel about her. So I just wanted to put that out there. Your podcast, Two Jack Bros, is a really, really unique show. And what I was really struck by is how you bring comedians up the chakras. And I wanted to ask you, did you anticipate that being difficult? Because it doesn't seem difficult, but I always have a prejudice thinking the average person isn't so into spiritual stuff. So how did you anticipate that going, talking about these spiritual, new age, metaphysical topics with comedians?
Mark, I'm going to be perfectly honest with you. I was more concerned about getting them to stop talking about any one question, right? Because we're talking about comedians. We're talking about people who, more than anybody else, loves talking about themselves, whether it's something good or the most embarrassing thing that you can get a human to talk about. As long as they're getting to talk about themselves, you will get a willing comedian, right? So real quick, I'll tell you, I can see the questions right now. Everybody gets the same 7 questions, which is, like, how did you learn to overcome fear? Somebody or something you want to apologize to. The most disappointing, like, how do you deal with disappointment? What have you learned from grief? Your favorite lie to tell? Things that you thought were separate, but now you see are the same, and one thing that you can't give up and why. So it's just like, how did you learn to overcome fear? That could be an hour with any one comedian.
That's a tough one. That's a tough question. And with a comedian being afraid, that's part and parcel to the career. I mean, you got to get over that, or else you don't make it. Like, I've done one open mic in my life. One open mic.
Yeah.
So, one, folks. I've not been able to go back. Maybe I can blame it on the pandemic, but no, I have not gone back, and I'm sure there's a little bit of fear involved with that. But yeah, being a comic is a tough job. I work for Sam Tripoli, and I've seen this sort of behind the scenes of the life of a comic, and there's a lot more than just telling jokes, but you start with that root chakra, overcoming fear, and maybe we can shift gears a little bit and talk talk about you, Sidney, because you lived an unconventional life. You lived in 11 different homes by the while you're still a kid, all over, moving about, and this is sort of built unusual confidence, which inspires me. I think it's definitely got me to think twice about my shyness. But when did that start for you? Was it sports? Was it just growing up in that kind of household where you had to sort of stand up for yourself? I mean, when did this overcoming fear become like? Because now I look, I think Sidney's a fearless guy. So when did you pass that?
Oh wow! So I would say that I was probably the most fearful guy growing up, and I was growing up in the communities that I grew up in, they were very kind of dangerous outside and really scary, and a lot of the reasons that those environments were scary were my family. So they didn't see it as scary as I saw it. You know what I mean? My mom was, trying to thrust me out into the world that I was absolutely terrified of. So she was very heavy handed in the way that she handled trying to get her son to not be, with her words, not mine, a pussy. She was trying very hard to depussify me. And so she would like take me out front of the yard with boxing gloves and make me box her until other neighborhood kids came and start forming a circle, and then she would kind of make me box all of them, and these kids were just like excited older kids that would see a thing like, oh, I can knock this little kid's head off in front of his mom, so that was terrifying. Anytime I ever had a problem, or if she ever found out that any kid, I could never tell her ever that a kid teased me or made fun of my name or anything, because she would literally take me to that person's house to fight. And that was terrifying. So it got to a point where I was just afraid of everything, just like absolutely afraid of everything. And I was obsessed with the Looney Tunes growing up. And I remember there was an episode of Looney Tunes where they were doing, they were mocking the president that's responsible for this quote, but I don't remember who it was. This quote stuck with me. But the quote, "There's nothing to fear but fear itself," right? And then I had somebody, I didn't quite understand what it meant, but it was like, as soon as I heard that, I was like, as a person who is like, whose life was all about fear, it was like, I should know what that means, So I had one of my uncles explain it to me, and he just basically said, fear, like being afraid is the only thing to be afraid of. So if you're afraid of something, you have to go after it. And from that point on, it was, Mark, I swear to you, it was literally that day. Anything that I feel a little trepidation about, I just forced myself into it. And that's just been my way for so long that I think on the outside, it kind of looks like I'm fearless, but on the inside, it's just like if something scares me, my first reaction is to get right after that.
Yeah, you have drive, man. And at first, maybe if somebody tunes into one of your shows, your podcast just once, they might hear you tell a story and think, oh, this guy, he's just got a big ego or something. But the more I've listened to you tell stories, the more I realize, like, no, you actually have this drive. You actually are this passionate, and you are not afraid to talk about it either, which I think a lot of people get the instinct of, like, humility in those situations. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying you're not humble, but you express it in a way that's joyful. And I think that that's really important because some people, with this competitive world that we live in, they take that as an offense. They take that as maybe even like, oh, he thinks he's better than me, when really I think people should think about that instinct that we have to project onto others and realize that maybe the reason you see that in Sidney and feel a certain way is because you're not acting on that impulse yourself. And that's exactly what happened to me as I was listening to podcasts. I mean, I've listened to Stoner Dad since it started, so it's been about a year now, year and a half. I kind of realized like, oh, I'm projecting onto this guy. It's not that like he's egotistical. It's like I don't have the drive that he's talking about, and there's some kind of like feeling that's stirring up in me about this. So I just wanted to kind of bring that up, and I forgot to mention in the intro, you're a martial artist, and I've been a martial artist for almost 10 years now. When did this come into your life? Because obviously your mom hosting boxing matches that you weren't sort of signing up for on your front lawn, that would lead a person to possibly want to know how to fight. Did you immediately make the connection as a kid, like, okay, like if I'm going to keep getting in these fights, I better learn how to fight? Was that a sort of thought that came to you, or how did martial arts come up?
Well, it did stem from that boxing out in the yard. So when that would happen, I told my mom like I wanted to get into some sort of martial art because of that. But I mean, the truth was, I learned about judo, and somebody like again when you're learning about things when you're a little kid, everything's I guess explained in binaries, so it's easier to explain to a kid. And it was the binary that I was explaining judo was like boxing, you get hit, judo, you don't get hit. So I was like, I want to do judo, mom. And dude, I was like, dude, my mom boxed growing up. My mom actually went to a boxing gym and learned how to box. My mom was, she gets embarrassed when I say this, but it's the truth. But she was a street fighter in our neighborhood. She was very well known for her undefeated record as a street fighter. And she was one of these people that there would be like sanctioned hood fights and people betting and gambling on them and things like that. And so she had a lot of, she kind of saw judo or just martial arts in general as kind of like a cowardly way out, like a way to fight without fighting, So that was tough to even get her to take me to do that. And so, yeah, that was when I was really young. So I would say probably I got into that when I was about 10.
Now, do you think because that impression that your mother has is not, just hers. There's a lot, 10 years ago, martial arts was sort of becoming mainstream with the UFC, but you're several years older than me, so I imagine that has shifted a bit, don't you think? UFC has kind of become akin to the NFL, right? So now the average street person, who has that mentality of like, oh, this is, how you get tough is street fighting. That's kind of shifted, because I remember that was a big thing that people would tell you when I was a kid and I would talk about, oh, I'm in karate class or I'm in, MMA class. They'd be like, oh, yeah, well, that's nothing compared to street fighting, you'd never stand a chance doing a karate against, a guy like, who's the Kimbo Slice. Like Kimbo Slice is not the best example, but he stands as kind of like a street fighter who actually was tough enough to hold his own with the UFC for a little while. But yeah, it's kind of, it's an interesting prejudice that people had against martial arts. What do you think that is?
Well, I would just because it's just the lack of commonality. Listen, we can get into this, and I think it has to do with a lot of things, right? So, you just think about like the Asian explosion into cinema, back in the day, and I'm not necessarily a woke guy, but like there's some things that are just true, right? And at that time, Asian men were seen as pretty weak until Bruce Lee. And Bruce Lee is like 3 feet tall. You know what I mean? So like their toughest guy, like again, a hero of mine, a hero of all my uncles and stuff, but still he's a miniature human man. So the toughest guy that they've produced could fit in my pocket. So yeah, it's not easy to see, when you're looking at our representation of warrior men, like our boxers, even back then, they're like these big, we laud the heavyweight champions, right? You never hear anybody talking about, like, the only reason why we know about one of the lightweights is because Floyd Mayweather is an undefeated boxer.
Right.
If he wasn't an undefeated boxer, we wouldn't know anybody in his weight class.
Right.
You know, it's all the heavyweights. So when you're comparing the people that we praise in America, which are these giant men that can barely move, compared to these Asian martial artists who are like, these men have to make sure not like in the tread of their boxing shoes after they're doing footwork. You know what I mean? So it's like, I think that has a lot to do with it. Like, I think going forward, that has changed, right? But like, you could not convince my mom that Floyd Mayweather wouldn't knock out every single person in the UFC.
Right. Yeah, I think there's still a lot of people who feel that way, and yeah, people are set in their ways. But I've only asked this question in the reverse, but I feel like I have to ask you, Sidney, is your family crazy? Do you think your family's crazy?
Mark, I think my family is objectively crazy.
Well, that's the first time. Usually we ask if our families think we're crazy on this show, and the answer is typically yes. So I'll ask you that too. Does your family think you're crazy? I mean, you're quite an inspiration, I would imagine, to them. I mean, you sort of set your own path. You broke the mold that you were cast in, and you're doing really well for yourself. I mean,
yeah. Well, yeah, they definitely think I'm crazy, and I'll link that back to something you were saying earlier about how people can like maybe look at me and consider me to be like egotistical or arrogant, which is very common. Not very common, but it happens. But it's funny the way that it happens, because I think my family is they fall into this. So when people see me at first, before they get to know me, before I talk long enough for people to have a really good sense of who I am, when they first see me and they see what is like a confident guy, they root for it. People root for that immediately. They see somebody confident, they want to believe that that is possible. But they believe in confidence in this way. It's like confidence is this thing that's almost separate from being a human, right? So like, he has confidence, but he has something that I couldn't have, because I'm subjected to all these human failings and like these human limitations. And then I start talking, and then people are like, oh shit, he's retarded. Oh my God, like, how is he confident and I'm not? And that's when I think it starts to get, like, people start to judge it a little more. And I think that's what my family falls into, because like, for all of the successes that I've had, like, I was in honors classes in school. I was in AP classes in high school. I was the vice president of the National Honor Society. I was a track star growing up. I was constantly in the newspaper being interviewed and stuff. Then I was signing autographs for people at track meets when I was like a senior in high school. But my family also knows that, like, like sometimes I just don't tie my shoes. You know what I mean? It was just like I would get dressed really quickly. I would sleep as long as possible, get up with like 5 minutes to get to school, like throw everything on and then get to school. And I'd show up in school with like my shirt on backwards and shit like that. Like, they know that about me as well, So it's like, so when they see me accomplishing all these things, on one hand, it's like, oh my God, that's amazing. But then on another hand, when they know like how imperfect I am, I feel like it puts a lot of pressure on them to feel like they should be accomplishing things. And if they're not pushing themselves to accomplish things like I am, then I must have a very negative opinion of the way they're conducting themselves in life. So as almost like as a defense against that, they just start accusing me of being arrogant, so that it dismisses any need to do what I'm doing.
Right, deflecting what they lack in themselves because they're unwilling to make that step forward, right, as I described. And yeah, maybe it took me a little bit of listening, but yeah, I certainly had that same kind of realization that what you were kind of inspiring in me was really an opportunity to improve myself. And I think our society just doesn't allow for this way of thinking as much, because we're so set in this like competition sort of, everybody has this sort of chip on their shoulder, and
Mm-hmm.
it feels like if we could just get to a point where we were less sensitive and more open to like rib each other and joke like the way you guys do on Stoner Dad's Dad Me. I mean, this is why I enjoy listening to this kind of stuff. I mean, sure, I learn a few things here and there, but for the most part, it's like an emotional reprise from the rest of life. You know, when you're kind of going out and dealing with maybe people who you don't know, sort of small talk and whatnot, there's this like inauthentic stiffness that kind of wears away, and listening to comedy podcasts just kind of eases that tension for me. But I think it has something to do with the fact that you guys are just so authentic speaking with one another, and it kind of pushes you guys to hold each other accountable. Like Matt, the way he's been talking lately about his relationship with pornography and like being open about that, and how he's like, I haven't jerked off to porn in months and it's not even a big deal. And you guys are all kind of laughing, and maybe you guys don't have that same relationship with it, but you're supporting his authentic experience of this. You're not judging it because, oh, you still like porn or whatever, and I think that's really what this world needs more of, and maybe that's just our American bias and how our American culture is, but maybe this is a good segue into what we were hoping to discuss, which is how culture actually shapes language rather than language shaping culture. At least this is the sort of point you wanted to make, right? And I think people can argue either way, but it seems like culture shapes language, and we see how language can really ensnare people and change their life and limit their life if they're not, brought up and raised, their awareness isn't raised early in life. You see people with limited vocabulary having a very limited means of where they can go in life, right?
Yeah. So the reason why, again, so this is something that I'm just like, I do love language. I love language. I love communication. And when I'm researching things in my spare time, that tends to be what I'm looking more into. And right now, I'm listening to this guy, John McWhorter. He's giving these lectures on language, what he calls the language hoax. And so the reason why I believe that culture shifts language, which is his point of view, is so in sixth grade was when my mom, the reason why I moved in and lived in so many different houses growing up is because my mom had a drug problem, right? And she also had a temper problem. She fought at work all the time, and she would get fired from jobs, and then we'd get evicted from places. And that's why I ended up living in so many different places. Finally, when she was at the point where she needed to get her life together and start trying to make things steady for herself, she couldn't really do it with her children until my brother and me. My older sister was already running away from the house at this point. She wasn't really in the picture, but she sent my brother and myself to live with my grandma, and then she went to a rehab like an hour away, and that was the last time that I ever lived with my mom. Right, so this was the beginning of sixth grade. Now, when I went to live with my grandma, it wasn't necessarily the best environment. Right, my grandma kicked my mom out of the house when my mom got pregnant at 13, I believe it was. And she kicked my mom out of the house because when my mom told my grandmom that she was pregnant, my grandmom could no longer deny that her husband was raping my mom. Right? So she was not pregnant by my grandmom's husband. But the fear of that being the case, like, blew the whole entire family apart. Right? But they from what I hear, it's like they weren't necessarily the nicest people. My grandma had 14 kids, and they are some fucked up people, man. And so when I went to move to that house, it was generationally toxic, right? And I didn't know how much or the extent to which my mom was the black sheep of the family. And therefore I didn't know how much they didn't want my brother and me living in that house. Like in my opinion, I mean, from the way I saw it, was like, oh, we're going to go live with our grandma. She's saving us. But I mean, they all resented. There were multiple adults also living in that house. And so the first day that my mom took me to live in that house, it was 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. She pulled me and my brother out of bed in a very dramatic fashion, took us to live with her grandma, dropped us off, left, whole big scene. And then that morning, I was woken up by apparently my grandma was calling for me. I didn't hear her. And she had to call past my aunt's room. And my aunt was so sick and tired of hearing my grandma yell that she came up to the attic where we were sleeping. And instead of like nudging me awake, she just started pounding on my face, and like I didn't know what was happening, and I woke up and I was like really afraid. And my brother and I were laying in the same bed. And since I didn't know what was happening, I jumped over top of my brother to cover him up because I didn't know if I was the only one being hit or if we were being hit, And I jumped on him to cover him up. And she laughed. Like that was my first day in that house. She just started cackling, and then she went downstairs and she got on the phone to call one of her friends that was actually a good person who was on her way to work. She called that friend to catch her before she left the house so she could brag about what she just did to me. So as I was coming downstairs, like, it scratches on my face because she had these like long nails and these ridiculous bracelets that she wore. Like, she fucking slept in them apparently, but it was like a Mortal Kombat character. You know what I mean? And it's like, so I have all these scratches on my face, and they're not deep scratches, so they're the kind that burn.
Yeah.
Because it's like I'm also in the attic with all the insulation, so like that event caused me to be sweating profusely. I was terrified, Mark, and it was like, so I'm sweating profusely. The sweat's pouring into these scratches. I'm walking past her room and I hear her bragging about what she just did to me. And she's laughing about how I jumped on my brother to protect him. And it was just like, I couldn't believe that this is the environment that I was thrust into, because as bad as it was with my mom, I would say that she gave my brother and me maybe too much love. Like, she wasn't the best at knowing how to love and be loved because of the situation she came through, but she definitely overcompensated with deep compassion. And so I had to change the language of my mind so that I could be able to flourish in that environment, right? Because I went from an environment with my mom where, like it was like I could do no wrong, like I was her little angel, and I was she's constantly telling me that I could do this and I could do that, and I could be the president and I could be that. And now I'm in an environment where, because she's my mom, all of my adult peers and guardians are telling me that I'm worthless, I ain't shit. Some racial things were going on. Like my grandmom and most of my aunts and uncles are way lighter than my mom and my family. And so I was dealing with a lot of that.
Yeah.
And I had to change the language of my mind, in a sense that it's like, because I was having a hard time loving these people. And again, growing up as a fan of like Looney Tunes, I was also obsessed with Batman and these types, and the martial arts. I knew that it would be wrong for me to grow the hate and anger that I was feeling for them, right? And so every night when I went to bed, I had to recondition my brain on what family was and what people were, right? Because they weren't even treating me like a human at that point. And so I had to condition my brain to like understand that that's who they are. They have their limitations. They have their own darkness that they have to go through, and that doesn't necessarily, there could be reasons why they're doing these evil things that are way beyond me. And loving them because they're human isn't wrong. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, wow. I imagine that felt very like you had a lot of responsibility as a young man, you know, like
Hmm.
you felt like probably like, okay, mom's not here anymore. I got to deal with these people and I can't grow to hate them because that's only going to make my life worse. I mean, I don't know if you even saw that far ahead at that point, but that instinct inside of you to not hate them, I mean, man, that's really big. That's a lot. You're
Yeah.
hitting me right now, Sid.
Yeah, dude. So my only contextualization for it was Batman and how every now and again he would get overcome with his past
Mm,
and he'd start like going a little ham on people.
yeah,
You know what I mean?
yeah,
And then he'd have to reconnect with himself. And usually, if there was like a comic book where that was happening with him, there was another villain for whom that was completely taking control of them, right?
mm.
So that's I was just trying my hardest to not be a Batman villain.
Right, right. That sort of reality in those really great stories that DC and Marvel gave us, that the true evil comes from the corruption of the human soul, you know, and that we all have the same equal chance to be good in this world. And you know, some people are treated really, really poorly and succumb to that and end up treating others poorly. So right on to you, brother, for not succumbing to that. Now, that was, you said, the sixth grade, so you're in, you know, secondary school, middle school, dealing with all this stuff. What was high school like? If middle school was that tough? I mean, you obviously you got into sports. I imagine you probably kind of found your group, your friends at that age. But what was it
Mm-hmm.
like? I mean, you grew up in Pottstown, which is kind of suburban PA. So
Mm-hmm.
what was that like?
It's like it's more of like a suburban rural town.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, again, like outside of the house, everything was. I mean, I lived a pretty charmed life for the most part. You know,
Mm,
like I was an exemplary student. You know, all through school. You know, and because of the hard life that I had growing up, I was also a little precocious. I was more comfortable talking to adults than a lot of kids my age, which meant that I had even from even in elementary school, I had always had a very good talking relationship with my teachers. You know, and at every stage of school that I was always in, I was they loved how mature and wise I was told I was wise by all of my teachers growing up, and so yeah, even high school was relatively easy compared to what I was leaving to go to school.
mm. Right. Now, does that play into your role now as a teacher? Because you're not just a martial artist, you're actually an instructor at a jiu-jitsu school. Is that correct?
I do sometimes volunteer with the kids. So like Tim Butterly, who does Stoner Dads with me,
Mm.
he teaches more consistently at the gym than I do. I'm like a high end concierge at our gym. So anytime somebody there, I need to step up for something, like I'm that guy.
Mm. Awesome.
So if a teacher can't make it, or like my wife also, she's an instructor at the gym. So sometimes she has to take the class by herself, and she might ask me to come help her with it and stuff like that.
Mm.
Um, yeah. So but fitness stuff, I'm more impactful on the fitness stuff at our gym for the adults than overall martial arts instruction.
Okay. So maybe not so much with other students, but at least with your own children, you probably take that role as a mentor very seriously, given, you know, you had that maturity at such a young age. Do you see that in your own kids, or do you think you've kind of, as a parent, given them a different life than the one you were raised in?
Yeah, I mean it's different, but it's wild how many parallels
Mm,
there are for my life and their life, because of course I'm trying to give them something way different than I had. Although it's tough, right? Because and I think Butterly would have the same uh, issue because he and I both grew up in very hard environments. and that shapes you in a way that makes you savvy about things. Now, because of how hard we work through our lives to get away from that type of environment, our kids don't have to deal with that same situation that we had growing up. But there's a key element that's going to be missing from that now. And it's like, well, how do you give them that element, that sobering element of what life can be like without putting them in that danger that you grew up in? Right. So, I mean, that's kind of tough because you also want them to experience as much joy as possible. But you know that if they experience too much joy now, then later on in life, they're not going to be able to create it themselves. So it's a tough balance, but I think we do a decent job. Like I'm not too mad at it. My kids do sometimes around the house call me coach. It's pretty ridiculous.
Well, that must be fun. And I would say, as a martial artist, I think martial arts is a good way to safely bring that element into a child's life. I mean, for me, I was in all sorts of after school scraps and whatnot. And because of my unusual height at a young age, kids would point me out for fights thinking like, oh, if I beat up the tall skinny kid, that makes me look better because I'm David versus the Goliath, you know. So I had to hold my own and make sure I wasn't going to become, you know, the whipping post for the neighborhood. And I ended up becoming like kind of feared and realizing like, oh, this whole martial arts thing isn't about kicking people's ass. It's about how I've improved my situation now. And now people are looking up to me, and I could either, you know, be responsible and treat them with respect and kindness and give them that respect back that they're giving me, or I could become a bully, you know. And and I wasn't a bully, luckily, but I saw how martial arts could have open that world up for me, because my you know, childhood wasn't that tough. My parents worked so much that I didn't spend as much time as maybe I would have liked with them, but either way, there was that sort of latchkey kid kind of anything goes in my mind that yeah, who knows? If martial arts wasn't there, I definitely wouldn't be podcasting right now. I don't know where I would be.
Yeah. Do you ever think back to that time? Because I remember that guy. I remember that the tall guy, the tall, sweet boy that was getting picked on just for being his height. Like I kind of had that in a different way because I was like really athletic and I was always being, you know, hoisted on the shoulders of my town for my athletic ability, and then people wanted to prove that they could kick my ass because of that.
Right.
So I was friends with that tall guy a lot. And so the question that I have for you is like now, do you ever think back? Like if you can go back to then now with the knowledge of martial arts that you have now, like what would you do to all those evil little hobbits that were trying to come after you back then?
Oh my gosh, man. That's funny. There was one case where a guy who I actually saw at a bar like 5 years ago, and I felt sorry for him, where he speared me and got me real good, and I ended up getting on my bicycle and crying my way home. And if I had one chance to like,
Like you didn't even pedal, you were just like crying. You were just like crying your bike up the hill.
Yeah, I was creating a river of tears that was floating my bike home. Yeah. And yeah, if I could go back and retribute one loss, it would be that one. But I'm pretty satisfied with all the other experiences. Although I did get into a few scraps, I held my own even in before I learned martial arts. But I realized as I was learning martial arts, like, oh, this isn't for kicking people's ass. This is for preventing people from kicking your ass, right? Because it's like, once you learn martial arts, you don't want to go around and use it all the time. That's exhausting. You're training, you're freaking busting your ass 6 days a week. The last thing you want to do is fight on your weekend off, you know?
Yeah, well, I'll say this. So like I was telling you before, how like if something scared me, I would thrust myself into it. When I first started doing judo, one of my biggest fears, because that's what everybody was telling me, is that judo wouldn't work. And because of that, I was trying to fight everybody, like every bully that we had in our town that was like within a reasonable age to me. I think the oldest person that I fought was like maybe 5 years older than me when I was that age. And dude, I was like a little spaz, man. It was crazy because it was like this one year, just like it was this one summer, and it happened like in the period of a month. Like it was just this one day when I started doing judo, but every day before that I was terrified and like running from everybody and going home with my sister, and then my sister would have to come yell at some little boy about bullying me, and I'm behind my sister crying, and then the next day, like I won't stop trying to fight people. It was crazy.
I didn't have that. I was too timid. I mean, I got real pushed into those situations, and
Mhm.
and yeah, it definitely felt like my height gave me a sort of fear advantage, so that once I knew just a little bit of martial arts, like people were like, "Oh yeah, his arms are really long. He's gonna punch me." And
Mm.
there was one kid that flipped me off in the hallway, and I just socked him right in the jaw, and that was kind of the last time anybody screwed with me. Was that? Well, like
Mm.
he just like stuck his finger in my face, and I just loaded up with a jab and was like, yeah, all right, dude, whatever.
Yeah.
Moved on, and people were kind of like, whoa, that guy's got anger issues. And it's like, no, I don't have anger issues. I just don't want to be like the outsider looking in anymore. I want to fit in. And martial arts didn't ever really help me fit in with that group of people. It actually
Hmm.
made me realize,
Hmm.
like, oh, I don't need to be a part of that group. And I think this is also how, getting back to like the language and culture thing, this is a big part of how people can sort of turn themselves down the wrong path early in life, is getting into the wrong, well, we'll call it microculture or subculture in your formative years. And the language that you learn in that group can kind of skew what your life might be.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think we realize how much our culture is. I guess algorithm isn't the word that I'm using. Logarithm is the word that I want to use. But I do. I feel pretentious using certain words sometimes. And I apologize if I'm sounding uh, unappreciative of the fact that I got to be educated. But it's like, anyway, I'm sorry. That's my insecurity. I apologize. But people don't realize how much culture is a language, right? And how much that language determines everything. It's like there's, if culture is a language, it's made up of, a multitude of dialects, right? And it's it's just super important to be able to have a true understanding of what your culture is, or what your code is. You have to have a something that you like. This is what I live by. This is what I stand for.
Mm.
Otherwise, yeah, it's I mean, if you don't stand for anything, you fall for everything, I think is the
Mm-hmm.
quote.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I very much like thinking of culture as its own language. And yeah, I was just talking recently. I think it was on Stoner Dads. I apologize. I don't always remember whether or not we talk about things on that. It's like we do actually get pretty high to do that podcast.
I don't
Um,
blame you. In it goes in and it comes out, and then a few days later, you're like, what the heck did I talk about with those guys?
yeah,
I know the feeling.
yeah. So, but I've been ruminating on this for a couple of days. It's been cracking me up. So one of the cultural miscommunications between Black people and white people, right? And this is a huge cultural miscommunication. So white people culturally, by the time they graduate high school, they already have a list of people that they know in life that they're gonna have to take shit from, right? Like, i.e., your boss. You might not like it, but you're gonna have to take shit from your boss, right? You might not like it, but you're gonna have to take shit from your wife, right? And like, there's different stages in development. Like, you're like, okay, when I'm in this, I'm gonna have to take shit here. I'm gonna have to take shit from my coaches or whatever. And as a Black person, going into kindergarten, you already know that you're not going to take shit from anybody, especially white people. And that causes a huge cultural miscommunication where even if you're a Black boss and you have to, stick it to your employees, your black employees a little bit, those black employees will see that black boss as racist. And it's just a cultural miscommunication about how to handle authority.
Well, and it certainly feels justified the way authority has treated at large the black community in America, at the very least. But it seems like, there's this sort of, well, it was only us mentality when a lot of people have fallen under the thumb of that authority, just in different ways. We all are oppressed in our own way. But yeah, no, it seems like we're sort of, at least speaking from my perspective as a white man, we're sort of indoctrinated with the "you're not the boss, he's the boss" mentality. Listen to this person. Whereas, it seems like self-esteem and confidence for someone who can easily look in a history book and see the awful things that have happened just 20, 30, 40, even 5, 10, 2 years ago, to black people in America. Yeah, you're going to want to give your child some confidence and say, don't take shit from nobody. Don't let that affect you. Just because, there are these hateful people out there, don't let that affect you. So I think it's justified, but it does create this clash almost of like, whoa,
Yeah.
man, I'm oppressed too. Whereas then you're looking, I'm like, no, you're not oppressed. I'm oppressed.
Yeah, I think it's a very compassionate thing to believe that that's justified. I mean, I don't think it's justified only because I would look around and the kids that were more successful early on were the kids whose families uh, were they tended to be more in the church. To be honest with you, and, not that religion had anything to do with it, but I think the context of religion was a good base for them, and also it was people that were told to respect everybody, right? Like I wasn't taught to respect everybody, and I was taught don't ever let anybody disrespect you, and those are two very different approaches to respect, right? Because respecting everybody is a quicker path to gaining respect. Not letting anybody respect you is a quicker path to not being respected, right? So but then the other thing that I really noticed that separated black kids from my cultural point of view and black kids from the what should be considered black culture, right? Because what is considered black culture is the horse shit that I came up in, right? What should be considered black culture are all of the black people that actually succeed from our community. And all of those people always had a sense of this shit isn't all about you, right? And that took a very long time to learn for me. Like as wise as I was considered, as sweet of a kid as I was, it was really easy for me. And I never once accused anybody of racism ever. But by God, did I accuse people of not knowing how to respect me properly. And that was huge. That was huge for me. Like it took me into my early 30s to realize like, oh shit, this doesn't all revolve around me.
Wow. Yeah, this is a very complex conversation we're having here, Sidney. I really appreciate I really appreciate you being this honest with me. I'm someone who probably has a interesting experience myself of race, growing up with two white parents, one of them who, for the most part had only black friends. My father has all of his coworkers are black, and so it was never like a thing for me to see anybody else's other then, because in my life growing up I had black role models, white role models, I had a Native American godfather, so I had all these other influences, and it definitely, it feels like there's an impulse. What I'm hearing is there's an impulse for black men, black women to get themselves out of that cultural sort of context of less than by proving to the rest of the world, like, no, I can do this, right? And I think some people take that the wrong way. And what I'm hearing you say is like, it doesn't revolve around you. It's not about you. It's about us. Like, let's all, like, the way you act affects me in this sort of, but in a way, when we look at the world, that shouldn't be the way things are. We shouldn't judge you by the merits of other people who have the same skin color as you. We should judge you by your actions alone, right? And I think that's something that black people have to go up against, whereas maybe white people don't, because there isn't that prejudice built into that.
Yeah, and not to like stick on this point too long, but my God, man, it's like the call for oppression, right? The like it's coming from inside the house. Do you know what I mean? Like you're not being oppressed by white people growing up. You're being oppressed by your own community because they're telling you how to think about white people.
Right.
And so one of the things that really crushes, I think, Black hood culture is the sentiment that they'll tell you as a Black person, you have to work twice as hard as a white person for the same amount of success. And that's insane. That is one of the most, but you don't know it at first, right? You believe that at first. And then you don't realize it until you have to destigmatize yourself for a lot of things so that you can conduct yourself in a different way, right? And that's when you start to see, oh no, everybody can like fake it and just kind of like cruise under the radar. Like that is on the table for literally everybody. And everybody talks about like, we have to raise Black excellence. We have to raise Black excellence. Like that's not the issue. We have to raise Black mediocrity. Like we have to make a lot of people that are struggling realize like, dude, you can work a little bit harder and for a lot more gain. You know what I mean? Like and to be truthful, you just in this world have to make it look like you're working hard.
Well, and
like
in a sense, what I'm hearing is like their problems are easier to solve than maybe they think because they're focusing on a problem that's not quite solvable, and maybe that's working against them in the long run generationally, right? Where people who have this idea that, oh, we've been oppressed and we got to be excellent because of that oppression, you're actually putting yourself in a detrimental position.
Yeah, man, I have so many absurd, unsubstantiated conspiracy theories about why this is the case in the Black community. And to me, and I'll say this, and you can like take it from what you want. I think a lot of it comes from people that would be like considered to be people like me as it stands now. Like, you know, I'm a hardworking, successful Black man, quote unquote. But I want to pull everybody up. You know, I want to pull everybody up. And I think a lot of people are trying to keep certain people out of the game, you know, because there are a lot of the people that aren't able to gain confidence socially in the Black community are very charming, outgoing, hardworking people, but they're so indoctrinated by what they're being told that they can't apply themselves in a way where they can start to see the fruits of their labor, right? So they kind of like keep distance. And I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about. My mom has a twin brother, right? And he's just one of the, you know, best people you could imagine working with his hands. Like he's just the man. Like him and my mom's dad, they own like apartments and stuff together. You know, they have a business, right? And my uncle that I'm talking about can't even read. And he drives an Escalade. Like he always has sick cars. His taxes are always paid. Like he's the man. Like all his papers are legit. Can't even read, right? Now, growing up, he would always complain about this one corporation in our area that wouldn't hire him. There's no way they'd hire him because he's Black and it's all this other stuff. And about 5 years ago, I was talking to him about that. I'm just like, that's crazy that they wouldn't hire you. Like like that was, that's their loss, because I know how hard of a worker you are. I know your talents and it's like, it's crazy that you couldn't get on some like low end position and kind of like show your ability and work your way up. And that's what I found out. He never even tried to get a job there. He never even applied. He just accepted that they would never hire him because of who he was. So he never even put himself out there. So
Right.
that's what I'm talking about. Like he continued to grow the idea in his mind bigger and bigger every year that he wasn't working there for how much they would never hire him.
Mm. Mm.
So and again, I'm not saying that's 100% of the issues in the Black community, but I think that's a lot of it.
Mm. Well, and I appreciate this perspective, Sidney, because it's not something that I readily have much experience of. But I'll tell you what, as someone who lives in Connecticut, near Bridgeport, near New Haven, I live in a very mixed area. We got people from all different walks of life and all different ethnicities, and yeah, I've had my fair share of Black experiences as a white guy, so it's interesting, like trying to talk about that stuff. I feel a little uncomfortable just because of the way white people are perceived nowadays. Talking about race is just obvious, unless you're a social justice warrior, you're talking from that perspective, you run the risk of just sounding like a racist, right? And yeah, it's just interesting to talk about. You use the phrase Black conspiracy theories, and I love that because some of my best friends who are Black have taught me some of the most interesting conspiracy theories throughout my life. Shout out to my friend Maurice. And yeah, I'm wondering, if you think there's something about, we'll call it Black culture, or maybe even the subculture of that, hood culture, that makes conspiracy thinking sort of ingrained. Like, do you think Black people are just naturally conspiracy theorists or prone to conspiracy theory? Because I'm a conspiracy theorist. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but I think they have, more than anybody in this country, a good reason to believe in conspiracies. I mean, look at the whole thing that happened in Philadelphia with the FBI throwing C4 on top of that community. I forget the name of the community. The move community, was it?
Oh yeah, the move bombing.
Yeah. So I mean, they have good examples of why. I mean, there's plenty others. The Tulsa, Oklahoma bombing. Obviously, what happened in the colonial days. But yeah, what do you think about conspiracy theory? Do you think it's detrimental in a way?
Wow. So yeah, I don't think it's necessarily detrimental. I mean, but also because I think it's a symptom of what is already an established cultural sickness, and I just stuck with the metaphor. I didn't necessarily mean to contextualize it that way, but the Black community is sick, Mark. We need to.
No, I think society at large is.
Yeah, it is, but it's because you can look at things historically, and you can see them as people, or you can see them as races. And if you see them as people, then you can look and see a situation has occurred. If you see them as races, then that takes away the human element of the situation. And if you don't mind, I'll use like what is somewhat of a current example, but not necessarily current. So, Mark, I'd never really paid attention to any of these shootings, right? Growing up, it was just like, I just accepted the fact that like white police are racist, and that's just what it is. And why would I even have to look into any of this? Like, what is the point of looking into? I already know this is why they're complaining. I see the hostility about it. They're taking care of that for me. Those are like, I'm an athlete. Those people are handling our civility, right? And so the one that I finally looked at was the Philando Castile shooting. That was the first police shooting tape that I'd ever seen. And I think that was in 2016. And I'm not even good with remembering dates, but I think the reason why I remember this is because it just stuck out to me so much. I watched that shooting and I saw a cop get out of his car. He pulled a guy over, got out of his car, asked the guy if he had his license and registration. Philando Castile said yes. The cop said, "Do you have any firearms on you?" Philando Castile said, "Yes, I do." And the cop said, "All right, well, don't pull it out." And Philando Castile started reaching for something, and the cop said, "Don't pull it out, don't pull it out." Start backing up, pulled out his gun, and shot. Right? The emotions of that traffic stop changed after the cop was like, "Don't pull it out." And then Philando Castile started pulling something out. Like, I don't know if it was his gun or if he was going for his gun permit. I don't know what he was going for. But I know that was a very cordial traffic stop up until that point. And whether or not from that point on there was a miscommunication, I think the miscommunication was human more than racial, right? I don't think that was a racially motivated shooting. Now, you can make the argument like, well, the only reason why he would be afraid that he was pulling out a gun is because he was black. Like, I'm not going to split those hairs with you. Like, I don't know that for a fact, right? He's a cop. I don't know what his experience is, you know? But I did not think that was a racially motivated shooting. And that kind of opened my eyes to all of them. And I started kind of looking into all of them. And, you know, when I was looking at these situations, it was like, okay, I get it. This guy doesn't like that he's being talked to by this cop right now, but why not just let this situation go and then move on? Like, if it's that big of a deal to you, go lodge a complaint later. You know what I mean? It's like, why fight?
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely seems like it's being used to push forward this locked down Orwellian situation. Like, there's a sort of aspect to this that's antagonistic, right? It's not necessarily that they're setting these situations up. This is a byproduct of the sort of miscommunications that happen in the world of policing and criminals, but they pluck these stories out of the sort of matrix of violence that goes on a weekly basis, and they put them in the main stage to sort of pluck at people's heartstrings and get them to go out in the streets and maybe riot and whatnot, right? I mean, do you think that's an aspect to it?
Yeah, I mean, and I'll tell you this, and I've never had a problem with law enforcement or anything, but until like somewhere in my 30s, anytime I would see a cop, I honestly didn't even see him as a cop. I saw him as a white person that I could fuck up. Like, that's the honest to God truth. And I think that, and again, that's that cultural communication of like, well, I ain't gonna take no shit from anybody, especially a white person. And a white person with a badge and a gun ain't no different than a white person.
Right. That's almost like a warlike mentality, like the mentality of an oppressed people. And, you know, essentially they are. I mean, people in this country are oppressed. We are. You and I are. When everybody got locked down, that's oppression. You know.
Oh, I didn't get locked down, Mark. Y'all got locked down.
Well, I
refuse to be oppressed. All right. I'm enjoying my parks.
Let's get into that, because I feel like that was a big turning point for me. I was being told at work, oh, you got to wear a mask and you got to do this and that, and I quit. I said, no, I'm good. I'm gonna be a Lyft driver. And then when Lyft made me take a picture of myself before I could go out and work, I said, you know what, screw this too. I'm gonna try to podcast, as crazy as that sounds, and it's worked out pretty fine. But yeah, no, I don't mean that we're all sort of mentally oppressed, but legally speaking, there was certainly some restraints. I couldn't go to the grocery store without wearing a mask, and
I could.
Yeah. Oh God, tell us about that.
I could.
Did you get into some fights? Because I got into some Tell us about that. What were your thoughts March 2020, like when everything hit the fan?
Well, and this is the thing, getting into the conspiracy theories and stuff. And the reason why maybe conspiracy theories are so prevalent in the Black community is because we growing up in poor environments, and I think this is more poor than Black, because I think poor white people will have the same opinion. But growing up in a poor environment, you are more to acknowledge the honesty of people, like the darkness of people. You know what I mean? Whereas so here's an issue that sometimes me and my wife have, right? You know, as a person that is like me, sometimes people will do things to slight me every now and again. I don't mind. I know how people react to me. I'm 42. I'm used to it. But I don't deny it, right? Because if I deny it, if I start denying that somebody did something to spite me in a certain situation, then if I'm forcing myself to deny it over and over again, eventually I'm going to start resenting the fact that I'm doing all this work, right? So if it happens, then, we can just acknowledge it and we can move on. And so the other day, like my wife was doing drills with somebody and they were doing like I'm a coach's pet. Our head coach, Tim Hart, like I am a coach's pet. Like I study everything that he says and does. I watch all of his matches. Like I'm a big fan of this man. And it was a technique that he had just got done teaching my wife, and she's about to go into a competition. So she needs to have this, she needs to be drilling tight right now. And I wasn't in class that day because I was about to travel to Ohio and stuff, and I didn't want to get too tired. And so she's drilling with somebody who's not necessarily as tight of a drill partner as I am. And they're doing one of the parts of the technique very wrong, but it's a very key part of the technique. And I said something to him about how they were doing it wrong, and that so that Ansley could start doing it, my wife could start doing it right, so she can get some of those under her belt. And when I said that, it was acknowledged that I was right. But then the person she was drilling with was like, okay, you want to move on to the next technique, like to a whole different move. And, it was like, okay, I get it. I'm not on the mat. That's none of my business. But there is no realm where that was the right thing to do. Like if you're drilling a technique and you find out that you've been doing something wrong while drilling it, you should probably do it right a couple times before moving on to the next technique, right? Now, that was just like a small slight to the person that said something from off the mat. I didn't take it personally, but it happened, right? And we were just talking to my wife, and like as we were having a conversation, as we were starting to get into the topic of like her drilling for that day, she was already trying to assuage the fact that that other person tried to slight me in a small moment, and she was like not defending it, but she was already trying to cast it in a way where like it didn't happen, right? And that bothered me. That bothered me a great deal. It was just like I'm not like, the anger that goes off is like, well, like you don't trust me with the truth. Like that's the truth. Like you think I'm gonna fly off? You don't trust your man, But really, I think that's also like a cultural thing. It's like we don't have to focus on the negativity of that person, right? But growing up in poor environments, you have so many people that are trying to screw you over all the time, right? It's just like you have to constantly be aware of the dark side of people, because it's almost like the nicer a person is, the more likely they are too good to be true, and they're trying to like worm their way into your confidence so they can just destroy you from the inside. So you have to be very aware of that. Now, flash forward to March of 2000, was it?
2020.
March of 2020. My bad. Yes, 2020.
COVID.
Yeah. So March of 2020, and it was just like none of it felt right. None of it felt right. Like I have a degree in economics. I can read data. Like I had no problem reading data. And when the first reports came out, anybody, and not just somebody who knows what a standard deviation is, but I thought anybody could look at that data and saw old people and morbidly obese people were the only people in danger for this. And when they were like, well, that's not true, but it's like, but I'm looking at the data.
Mm.
And then all of my life, herd immunity was a thing. You know, they would even tell you, let your kids fall on the floor so they can get adapted to the germs so that they build up their immunity. And now all of a sudden, herd immunity doesn't exist. Well, this is the game. Like I know this game. Like I grew up with pimps and drug dealers. I know this game, right? So that's when it's easy to start having conspiracy theories where it's like the whole entire government is acting like a fucking pimp right now.
Right. Yeah, and people don't have that experience when they're sort of raised in these sheltered environments and put into these, pipelines to success, and I think a lot of people take that for granted, even in like a community where I grew up. I grew up on the sort of poor end of it, but there were people in my community who went on to go to Yale, went on to go to Harvard, and things like that. So there certainly was that strain of privilege present, but it's really more of a shelteredness than it is a privilege. And those people end up being really puppets of this system that just rewards their consent. And we saw that consent management where, you could look someone and see on their face whether or not they were about the propaganda. And the way you could tell was if they were wearing a mask or not. And I tried, man. I tried to trudge through those grocery stores without the mask on, and it was like the Gestapo was there to kick me out every time. So I kind of laugh just because I know you from listening to podcasts that you've been on and some of your stories. So I can only imagine, what kind of interactions you got into back then. It seemed like a lot of comics were a little bit hesitant to talk about that, and I appreciate it because it did kind of get old to listen to from the comics that did go into talking about it. You go back and listen to, Two Jack Bros or even Dad Meat, or, it doesn't, you can hardly tell with some episodes that the pandemic was going on because you guys were so in the moment and kind of just talking about what was going on with your world. So yeah, I appreciate that perspective. Do you think cannabis use had also something to do with, people's health in that? Because I've smoked every day since I started smoking. So, I mean, there hasn't been a stop for me, but I heard people saying, oh yeah, THC or CBD kind of can help, with your immune system. And a lot of my stoner friends never got COVID.
Yeah, but I mean, we're also not getting tested, so
True. Well,
I don't know too many stoners that were out there swabbing their cheeks on a regular basis.
Exactly.
Because again, like stoners, that's another conspiracy crowd, right? And stoners are people like, nah, man, they're not getting in my cheeks,
Right.
because it's like, yeah, you're trying to find out other stuff, right? So. But yeah, I mean, possibly. Like, I don't know enough about the biological imprint that THC has in the body to be able to make an argument that it builds the immunity. That's not me. But well, I do know I smoked the whole entire time. I never got COVID once.
Well, I did want to kind of segue into the topic of cannabis because when I was in high school, I was on the wrestling team. I was very concerned with being a good athlete, and I was worried about smoking weed, although my friends were like, oh yeah, you should try it. I'd been, propositioned several times. What got me was seeing Eddie Bravo, and he hates, I said this to him once, and he did not like me suggesting that he inspired me to smoke weed. But I saw Eddie Bravo rolling, smoking weed, doing jujitsu, and I'm like, the guy who invented jujitsu moves is high out of his mind. Like, this is amazing. Yeah. I should try it. And then I find out Bruce Lee used cannabis in his training regimen. So I warmed up to the idea, and I actually had a really beneficial psychosomatic connection that was forged from using cannabis in conjunction with martial arts. And I'm wondering if you can speak to that, if you've had that experience being a stoner and also someone who practices and instructs others in jiu-jitsu.
Absolutely. So I didn't start smoking until I was like 22, 23. It was my senior year of college. So I got kicked out of school for a year and then I went back. So I graduated when I was 22, I think. It was 2002. And I was 22 when I started smoking. And I started smoking because there was this guy so I went to Lafayette College. There was this guy on campus. He was from Texas. He was a football player and he had to get shoulder surgery. And so he couldn't play football, but he was really good at basketball. And he was on an intramural basketball team. And I went to go see one of his teams play. And he wasn't like athletic looking. He was like a little bit taller than me. He wasn't jacked. He looked like he was like a hefty guy, you know? And this dude just didn't miss a shot. I'd never seen anything like it in a competitive basketball game. Like he did not miss a single shot. Every shot that he shot was beautiful. And he lived on my floor and I knew that he was like an all-day smoker. And I was like, holy shit, it must not be that bad. You know, because up until then, it was just like, it's going to ruin your life. It's going to ruin your life.
Right.
And I wasn't trying to mess up anything I was doing athletically, but I was injured at this point and I wasn't able to run track anymore. So I started smoking. And flash forward to now, I feel like it's safe to say. So if you remember Shah Carey, a track star, she wasn't able to go to the Olympics because she was smoking weed. And they found that out like a month before the Olympics. It was during the USA Olympic trials. And they were making a big deal about the fact that because it's against the rules for the International Olympic Committee, the IOC, you can't smoke cannabis. And so they were making a big deal about it, saying that like, well, weed isn't a performance enhancing drug. And I disagree with that wholeheartedly. There are a lot of things mentally that are a roadblock as far as training is concerned. Like it's not easy to do something 1,000 times, right? Again, and that's like when you're trying to get good at something, that's what you're looking at, right? You know, you're waking up in a day and it's like, all right, I'm going to do 1,000 of these, 1,000 of these, 1,000 of these. Next day, 1,000 of these, 1,000 of these, 1,000 of these. It's not easy to do that unless you're high, right? You can smoke a little bit of weed and all of a sudden that monotonous, repetitive motion, it feels different, right? It feels like instead of it being its own thing, it feels like something you're actually connected to. And you can almost feel yourself improving as you're doing it. And I feel like you're depending on what type of weed you can smoke, it can give you a sensation of being more aware of your body in space, right? And training that way, training with a higher awareness of your body in space, I think is a performance enhancing aspect.
You think competing as well could do that? Because that was one big issue for me as I smoked my junior year for the first time. And then my senior year, I was the captain of a wrestling team among 3 other captains. And, you know, obviously with a wrestling schedule, I wasn't able to like sneak away and get high in between, like before my match. I was surrounded by my coaches. I couldn't bring pot with me on the bus to these matches. And I would always get overcome with like nervousness. And I had a winning record, but it was like almost even like wins and losses. So I wasn't like the best wrestler on my team. And I chalked it up to that kind of mental pressure of like, oh, like, I don't know, when I'm in training and I'm high, I'm not even thinking about what the other person's thinking. But when I was wrestling, all I would think about was the other guy I had to face. And it was like this, like, you know, it would just smash me. And I realized, oh, I'm defeating myself before I even get on the match. And with cannabis, that tends to not, you know, whether you're just like daydreaming or something, you tend to not let that hit you as hard.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I do think there are some timing aspects that weed takes away from you,
Mm,
especially when you're talking about like a grappling art.
right.
Um, there's definitely some time, but like you were saying, there's a huge mental component to grappling, right? Where if you're able to stay positive, even if you even if you get crushed, that experience isn't as bad if you were able to maintain a positive outlook the whole entire time, which isn't really as easy, when you're not when you don't have cannabis or THC in your system. It's a lot harder to not consider the human consequences of what's happening to you. Like, all right, I am being physically dominated by another human man right now. And it's hard not to think that when you're sober, because that's a very sober, it is a very sober reality. Being pinned down and not able to move because of the efforts of another human man. That's almost every man's nightmare.
Yeah, for sure. Especially when you're like 6'5", 160 pounds, and you're going up against a 5'2" guy who's 160 pounds of pure muscle, and he's looking at you with like chest hair, and I haven't even grown like a nipple hair yet.
Yeah. It's very disconcerting, right?
Yeah. Oh
But
man.
but when
Flashbacks.
I'm yeah, when I'm high, I just don't think about things that way. I think about how silly everything is personally, and I'm
Mm.
not saying that that is what everybody else is going to think about. Like, but I was just talking to my wife about this the other day. I was just getting smashed up by a guy. Is your martial art jujitsu? I don't want to make that assumption.
Yeah, I trained in jiu-jitsu after high school. I had an instructor who's actually been on my podcast before. If folks want to go back and listen to episode 98, I believe, with my teacher Ryan Griffith. He was an amateur kickboxer and had a black belt in Brazilian jiu-jitsu. So yeah, I learned a sort of hodgepodge of stuff from him and another guy.
Yeah. So I play handguard a lot from the bottom.
Okay.
And so somebody was trying to smash past me the other day.
Mm.
And, I was on my right side because, most of jujitsu is played on the right. And he was smashing my head and arm up on me like this. And I whispered into his ear, right where I want you. Which is like, if I was sober, like that, it was just funny to me to say because I was high. You know what I mean? But like, if I wasn't, I would have been like, oh my God, he's about to pass me and blah, blah, blah. But, I was able to, get my knee shield back in, get myself to safety, and I wasn't passed in that situation. So, uh, I don't look at it. I didn't have, you can't have that experiment in real time to test whether or not if you weren't high, it would have been the same. But from experience, I think that uh, having THC in my system at that moment allowed me to be a little more relaxed while getting my arm smashed into my head.
Mm, yeah, yeah, for sure. There's definitely an edge, and I wonder if now that cannabis is, or I keep calling it cannabis, and ever since you said that thing about pretentious, I feel like a big dork calling it cannabis. But because one time my dad made fun of me for calling it, he was like, "So you're smoking pot, huh?" And I'm like, "No, Dad, it's cannabis. It's mentally, it's good for me." He's like, you know. He used to call it
Yeah,
dope, which really pissed me off because nobody calls it dope anymore. Dope is like
yeah,
heroin now. But anyways, yeah, I definitely think that cannabis can help with fighting, but I wonder if that is in the long run is gonna sort of end up banning it because, as you say, it's clearly a performance enhancing drug. So maybe
mhm,
martial artists like Nick Diaz and Nate Diaz won't exist in 10, 20 years because there'll be too much restrictions around professional mixed martial arts. I mean, they already aren't
yeah.
allowed to do it to some degree, but I think a lot of them get away with it. John Jones was in trouble for it a few years ago. I actually met John Jones once. He's
Oh, nice.
one of my favorite fighters. I was so starstruck by him. I don't even remember if I spoke English. I babbled good fight or something like that. But yeah, a lot to go on here with martial arts. But I did want to ask you. You mentioned this on an episode. I forget when. you were in the gifted program in school, and I'm wondering if you could talk about what that was like, because I wonder, if the gifted program, based on what, I don't know how much you've looked into it, but I've learned some weird things about it having connections to certain groups, and I'm wondering from like the insider's perspective what that was like for you as a child.
Wow, I don't even know about this. Is it connected to the Illuminati? Do I have a loose membership to the Illuminati I don't know about right now?
Well, according to some researchers, there is a pattern that exists with certain MK Ultra candidates where they happen to be gifted children. So that's not to say that every gifted child ends up being MK Ultra, but that seems to be the pool they select from. So just watch out, Sidney.
Oh, that's terrifying, Mark. I nap a lot. I don't know if that's an MK Ultra side effect
No, napping,
I feel like
no.
yeah, I feel like that's where they get you. I feel like you wake up from a nap and you're like, what the? You ever wake up from a nap and you're like, I'm still here.
Oh, I wake up from a nap and think it's 3 days have passed. I mean, it's
what I mean?
scary, yeah. Yeah.
That could be some MK Ultra shit right there.
Well, who knows? I mean, maybe we just cracked another conspiracy theory here. Hopefully,
Yeah.
you're not sleep paralysis you're not describing, are you?
No, I'm the type of dude to wake up and look at my step counter and be like, holy shit, 10,000 steps? Where did I get those?
Oh,
Yeah,
man.
that's me.
Oh man. Well, no, I don't. Based on everything I've heard so far, Sidney, I don't think you're MK Ultra, but who knows? Yeah, maybe you need to keep your eyes out for that.
Yeah. Is there like an MK Ultra retard division? Is there like an autistic division of MK Ultra?
If there were, they'd probably send those guys to do comedy podcasts. So yeah, maybe.
For sure. For sure. So yeah, so I don't like the gifted program for me it didn't feel like anything different. I was just taken out of certain classes to do like long division and shit. The one experience that sticks with me from that is so one of my and this might be the source of why pretension bothers me in a lot of ways, but one of my gifted teachers, who was also just a regular teacher, but one of my teachers for gifted explained to me that because we were smart, we were going to have a hard time explaining to things, certain things, to some people that aren't as smart as us because they can't see how things work the way that we can see how things work, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm like armed with this information, and I don't know if it was like, I don't know how recently after learning this was, but I was trying to explain something to my mom and she didn't understand it, and I was like, oh, well, that's because I'm gifted, and you're not going to be able to understand that because I understand it at such a level, and I can't explain it to you. And she goes, well, if you're smart, shouldn't you be able to explain anything to anybody? And I was just like, holy shit. Yeah, that sounds more right. You know what I mean? Like, that's the right thing.
Right.
So that's been my opinion about like gifted. It's like a lot of this is like it's like tooting your own horn. It's like it's just a bunch of people like stroking each other off about how smart they are, and then you end up with a lot of like horseshit science. Like I hate horseshit science that comes out. Like one of the things that bothers me right now is like really in vogue to say is that humans can't feel the sensation of wetness, right? The only thing you can feel is the temperature change, allegedly. Right? But it's like, what are you talking about? I've been feeling wet my whole entire life.
Yeah, like it's raining. How do I know it's raining? Yeah.
Yeah, because I feel it. If you put, it's like,
Right.
if I can't feel wetness, how do I know the difference between when I pick my nose and start doing this? Like, how do I know the difference between like slippery and then like a kind of like like paste? I just made paste out of my own snot. You know what I mean? Like you can't tell me I can't feel wet. That's insane. But that's what science says. And we are like, and me and Tim and Matt argue about this all the time. Like they tell you, seeing something fall isn't gravity, it's a consequence of gravity. And I'm like, fuck you, dude.
Well,
It's gravity.
yeah. We've heard on the show very recently that gravity doesn't exist. It's consciousness. It's an implosion happening in your mind. So,
Dude, the fact that we've only talked about that one time on the podcast is insane. I think we talk about it before we do every podcast.
really?
We argue about this all the time. Because it's measurable. Like I remember Newtonian dynamics, 9.8 meters per second squared. You can measure the effects of gravity. You tell me we don't know what the fuck it is, and I get it. As humans, we don't know a lot of things. We don't know like literally what a lot of things are. But come on, I know what wet feels like.
Right, right. Jeez. I think that's a part of what the gifted program is about, and this is why I'm so glad I brought it up. And it's about creating this divide, this like fluffy, feathered, and maybe I'm biased because I live in Connecticut, right near Yale University, you know, the second highest endowment of any university in the world. All these, you know, rich kids go there with all their privilege.
Do you know who has the largest endowment?
Harvard.
Oh, well,
Princeton
that's right.
also.
Oh.
Princeton has the largest per student, but Harvard has the largest. But there's a bunch of weird metrics. Why? Who are you gonna say? You may be right too.
Lafayette College has the largest endowment of any small college, like what was considered a smaller college.
Right. Okay. Yeah. The Ivy League schools, they're in a different category. But that's where you went to school, Lafayette, right?
Correct.
Right on. Yeah, I don't know if it's named directly after the Lafayette, but
It is.
Yeah, Marquis de Lafayette is a very, very interesting figure. If people were gonna maybe call you Illuminati, Sidney, it'd be for the Lafayette College, not for the gifted
Dude, I wasn't
program.
gonna say. I was like, oh shit, what did I just do? Yeah, Marquis de Lafayette was the man. You know, in a lot of ways, and you look at the history of Marquis de Lafayette, and you're like, was he the best dude on the planet or the worst?
Well, that's the thing is with secret societies, I've been really spending a lot of time with this. There was the faction of French Freemasons, which obviously Lafayette was a part of, and then there was the more we call them the American, but it was really more of a British style of Freemasonry, and they are the propagandists. The Freemasons who talked a lot of shit were those guys. Like they talked a lot of shit. So I think that's why we have this sort of dark light cast on the French Freemasons, but yeah, it's a murky subject. It sounds like you've looked into Lafayette, though.
Oh well, I mean if you before you go into Lafayette, one of the required readings is a book about the Marquis de Lafayette's life.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, did you happen to read in there about his city planning?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that's one of the most fascinating points for me is looking at some people call it geomancy. I don't know if Lafayette would have plainly stated that term, but you know, it's obvious with a place like Washington D.C. You look at the roads and they're all specifically, you know, making a certain symbol, but it's more subtle in a place like Philadelphia, which I know you're more familiar with, and New York City, New Haven, where I'm from. You know, there's this very it's like a ensnarement that they create over the landscape. You know, they channel this sacred energy into certain buildings, and I hope I'm not getting into crazy conspiracy world on you, but yeah, Lafayette has become a point of interest on this podcast lately, ever since we've been looking into ley lines and all that.
Okay, that's really cool. I mean, all of that stuff. It seems like he had his fingerprints in literally everything in America, in like early America, which is kind of wild. It's like the more it just seemed like it's hard to even contextualize what he was doing. It just seems like everybody was like trying, like he was just like a French dude over your shoulder, like, I'm gonna do it like this, and it was just like, I don't know exactly what he was doing, but it seems like he's like the French Forrest Gump of the Illuminati.
The French Forrest Gump. I love that.
Yeah.
That Forrest Gump comparison, I used that recently with Aleister Crowley, because he seems to have put himself in the world events of his day the same way Forrest Gump has, like in every place somehow. And
Yeah.
it makes you wonder if, certain people are a part of, well, the simulation, right? This is a very popular conspiracy theory online that everything's a simulation. I don't subscribe to it. I think I'm a little too old for that. I don't know. I like the organic version of reality too much to believe in the simulation. So what are your thoughts on that, though? Because I have heard you guys talk a little bit about it on Stoner Dads, but that's a comedy show. What are your honest thoughts about the simulation?
Oh, I don't know. It's hard, right? Because it's like, it's one of these things that makes me think like I'm really lucky that I have like intellectual limitations where I can't think too hard about it, because like if we are in a simulation, do we have the ability to contextualize the fact that we are in a simulation? Like because we're a part of the simulation, so can we conceive beyond the simulation? But that's no different than what we are actually existing in. Like we're part of the universe, so we can't conceive beyond the universe. So are we in a simulation in the sense that like we are in an actual computer program? Like I don't know. Like I don't know. But it's like we're definitely part of a larger thing, and there is definitely connection between all of the parts of the whole, right? Like nothing separate from nothing within the universe is a separate entity from the universe. So there's that. And I think intellectually that's as far as I can go.
Yeah, I don't spend too much time on simulation, but where I guess I take umbrage with it is the fact that it's taken long enough for me to try to wrap my head around what the universe is structured like, and it feels like the computer simulation metaphor is just too convenient. It's too easy, and maybe that's just me being upset that I came upon the idea too late. But yeah, it definitely is one of these very popular ideas that's sweeping the internet right now. Another one is this Tartaria theory. Have you looked into that at all? Has that come across your plate?
Not at least by that name. I don't know it.
Okay. Well, then let's leave it at that, because I don't want to be the guy to introduce it to you. There's so much.
That's Mark. I am here to be introduced to the things I don't know. What are you talking about?
All right. So let me break it down for you, because there was a time when people asked me to go on their podcast to break this down. So there's a theory that at one point in time, a very advanced civilization that had free energy technology was existing here in America, and some kind of catastrophe like a mud flood happened, and within 100 years after that, the colonists arrived, took it over, unearthed some of these buildings that were covered with mud, and those buildings became like the federal court building. And the more I've looked into Tartaria, the less I believe in it. But what's really weird, the weirdest part about Tartaria is that it comes from Russia. It comes from a Russian civilization that once existed and was actually erased from history. You can go back and find maps where Russia is actually called Tartaria instead of Russia. And and that, little seed of information has born all of these crazy theories saying like, oh, the Native Americans were Tartarians. Oh, the Mayans were Tartarians. Oh, the Swiss were actually doing this. And there's a lot of real information mixed into these Tartarian theories, but a lot of it is taking you down the direction of, oh, and that means, this conclusion. it's a conclusion that I don't agree with. But that being said, it's a rabbit hole that is growing by the day, and yeah, it's fascinating. You know, a lot of people love the episodes we've done about Tartaria with people who are far more knowledgeable than I.
It's very interesting. I mean, just a little bit you told me. I mean, it's like it is funny to think that like we dug up post offices and libraries. That's kind of funny. It's
Well,
like the idea that we excavated bureaucracy is
yeah.
kind of hilarious to me.
Well, and that's the thing is some people like they look at these Capitol buildings from the era of architecture where they built like marvelous, you know, things, and a lot of people scratch their head and say, "Oh, we couldn't do that today because look at how ugly our concrete structures look and compared to those." And I think that's just, you know, to me, you know, maybe they just haven't looked into the history of architecture that much, but it is a fascinating like idea that can like send people down a path of discovery, which is exactly what happened to me. I started looking around like, could these be Tartarian buildings? And I don't think they are.
I'm a big ancient advanced civilization guy.
Well, I can hit you with some theories that are more worthwhile if you want to learn a few things. Have you ever looked into the ancient American history and the different civilizations that were here before Columbus?
What do you mean by looked into? I mean, I get you get some of this stuff as you are perusing the ancient advanced civilization algorithm on YouTube. But what more specifically are you talking about?
So there's a story of King Abu Bakari, who was, I think, a leader of the Massas somewhere in Africa. And he was said to have left the west coast of Africa with 40 ships and 400 or 4,000 people and sailed to the New World. And about 40 or 30 years later, someone comes back and says, yeah, we got shipwrecked, but we need more ships. We need more ships. Come on, let's go look for the king. And all of those ships disappeared. And the theory is that maybe these, you know, African royals from, you know, I think it was like 400 AD, you know, not too long ago, only 2,000 or so years ago, colonized parts of South America and became what was maybe considered the Aztec or the Mayans, or contributed to those cultures in some way. So there's theories about that. Then there's also the whole Knights Templar up in the north who came up, you know, from Scandinavia and maybe settled Nova Scotia before Columbus got here. And then more recently, I've learned a theory about the Chinese and how the Chinese sailed up the Mississippi in, I think, 400 BC. Like they were in the Mississippi River and like writing about the mound builders, you know, before any Spanish had ever come to America. So those are the kind of stories that have really fascinated me lately.
Yeah, it's also first of all, I love that stuff. And you know, it's one of those things too. It's like it's really hard to understand the global impact of the Silk Road as well. And especially because there were so many incarnations of the Silk Road, like there's so many different times and it was like popping and it fell off and it started popping again. And I would love to be able to know like how much of that impacted all of the different types of artifacts that we find in places where they're not supposed to be, you know? And then we have, you know, LiDAR. We have LiDAR now. That's which is the ground penetrating radar that they're using to see things. And I'm sure you know about the things that have been uncovered in South America, and probably even what I'm about to say. But one of the cool things about it is they're finding these megalithic structures deep in parts of Africa where they thought there were no megalithic building at all. And up until they've been able to discover it with LiDAR. So I'm really curious to see, you know, what comes of that and like what is the, like how connected these megalithic structures are to the ones that they've found all around the world. You know, I'm ready. I'm ready for the proof of the Atlantean super colony to be proven.
Yo, So, all right, you got me going. I don't know how much more time we got because we're already close to 2 hours. I do wanna respect your time, Sidney. But, geez, I mean,
Anytime my wife says something remotely, I'm like, all right, you're the one that started this conversation. Just remember this.
well, what you said about them using LiDAR, I've learned that the jungles, like the Amazon and the Congo jungle, and maybe even the big jungles down there in Southeast Asia, they have all these megalithic structures hidden underneath the jungle floor. And one of the theories is that the reason why the jungle is that way is because this ancient civilization was like a garden that overgrown. Like they had the ability to supercharge their plants, right? And they were growing things to the point where when their civilization collapsed for some reason, everything just overgrew. Like the jungle became like, like what you see in that History Channel show where everything like deteriorates. Like, oh, what would it look like if all the humans disappeared? And they kind of use this CGI to show you what New York City would look like 500 years without humans, and everything's just like overgrown. Well, apparently that's what the jungles in South America and Africa are hiding, like this ancient overgrown civilization. And even some people think the deserts, like the Saharan desert, was once a jungle itself. So like how many times has this kind of cycle happened where a great civilization kind of goes out of control, grows this huge jungle, and then over a massive period of time that jungle becomes a desert. Like how much time does it take for a jungle to become a desert? And that's apparently what happened in Egypt. Like Egypt was not all sand when those pyramids were built. It was like what the Congo looks like. So some wild theories. Is a lot of rabbit holes to go down in that realm. I think Graham Hancock is kind of pushing that forward in a much more intellectual way than Ancient Aliens did, which is good. But it definitely, there's still things that for political reasons and for maybe even New World Order reasons, they're not telling us, and maybe it has to do with the Anunnaki. Who knows?
Yeah, I think we're going to find out that Africa, the continent of Africa, was the Garden of Eden.
Now, there's someone I had on the show recently who says Florida was the Garden of Eden. What do you think of that?
No, well, it's probably a slightly Florida is the Garden of Meth. It's not the garden. I mean,
miscommunication. Yeah,
it's a little slight miscommunication.
Well,
that's
no. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
All right, I'll go ahead.
Yeah, you go ahead, Mark.
It was definitely. It could be the case that Florida was connected to Africa. Even, I mean, have you seen the whole thing that Pennsylvania from Philadelphia to the ocean and then up to New York City and along to Boston? That whole strip of land is the same exact geology and environmental morphology as the west coast of Africa, where Morocco is. So it's like at one point in time, conceivably that was one body of land. I mean, I don't know if the Great Flood could have maybe sunken what was in between those two, but yeah, who knows? Maybe the whole thing connected was the Garden of Eden. But what makes you think Africa was the Garden of Eden? I mean, that seems to be the prevailing theory.
So when you look at the historical things that we do know about, like early man, and we know that early man started in Africa, and so early Homo sapiens started in Africa, and it was a long time. Like they stayed in Africa for a long time before going out, and like assuming like that was the garden. Like this, like why leave the Garden of Eden? Like you have everything you need in Africa. Like Africa is, as far as everything is concerned, like it's the richest in every mineral. It's like everything you need is in Africa in a great abundance, right? And so if the Bible is somewhat of a historical account, right? So not necessarily saying like we know that God created man, but maybe the Bible is saying we know that man's like started here, like the same way that we say now, right? We know that man started in Africa, right? But we in our books, when we're telling history, we say it in a very like a factual way. We're not telling a story along with it,
Mm,
right? We're not telling we're not using like the Epic of Gilgamesh to tell the story of creation, right?
mm.
So that could very well be. Uh, I mean, so those are the things that make me think Africa would be the most logical source for the Garden of Eden, just because, as far as everything we know now, that is where humanity started.
Absolutely. Haile Selassie, one of the greatest contributors to the UN, which I don't think they have really kept to his ideals. You know, the UN sort of degraded from the great, you know, uh, impetus that it started with. But Haile Selassie, you know, he says that Ethiopia has, you know, all of these secrets hiding in it about, you know, the true origins of man. So I'm with you, man. I think that that's very possible. I think the whole world was way more connected than we are led to believe from history books. You know, there's this whole story of the Wangara trading network that you might be interested in looking into, because it's similar to what you said about the Silk Road, but it's based out of Africa, this Wangara gold trading network. And what was interesting about this is that they had a language of signs. So they said nothing while they traded. And that's why there wasn't much left of their record in other countries. But these men from Africa traveled all through Europe, through Asia. And in European and Asian folklore, you have this myth character of the Moor's head, the Moor. And the Moor is always seen as like this wealthy king, like almost like the biblical kings that visited Jesus, right? And there's all this like festival in Italy, even of the Black Madonna, and all these things that are kind of shoved under the rug. And I think it reveals this much larger role that the African nations played in world history before this colonization period that, you know, teared so many indigenous communities apart. Yeah, I think a lot of the secrets of our origins were probably lost during that time period, because there were a lot of great kingdoms in Africa that had, you know, immense resources and schools and universities and, you know, things that people don't necessarily learn about from our history books that only talk about the colonization period of Africa.
Yeah, no, I love all of that stuff, and I feel like I have been studying the Silk Road recently as well,
Mm,
and I'm only kind of like in the early part of it right now. But one of the interesting things that I'm learning is how religion was spread because of the Silk Road. Like Buddhism, there was a point where Buddhism was almost died off as a religion, and like because people weren't feeling it because it was too strict. It was a very ascetic way of finding enlightenment where you're like you're starving yourself, you're meditating on a rock, and it was a very uncomfortable thing. So once Christianity kind of started popping, and Christianity got a little popular like on the Silk Road just because there was so much about it that was fun. You know what I mean? Christianity had had some fun aspects of it. Well, Buddhism started adopting some of the more fun aspects of Christianity. So there used to not be any sort of temple or shrine that was associated with Buddhism until Christianity showed how popular like temples and shrines can be for people to like collect and worship. And if you can get people to collect and worship, you can also get people to give offerings and tithings much easier than the way that Buddhists were collecting it, but just like hanging out on the side of the road, like hoping that the good natured people did something. And so they start putting stupas along the Silk Road, and that's basically how Buddhism started to get popular.
wow. Huh. I had not really considered the Christian impact on Asian religions, but it is definitely something that that I haven't looked into at all. I mean, I'm a big fan of Taoism, but wow, that's very interesting. I'm glad you shared that with me. What's the book that you're reading, or where are you learning this about silk trade?
It's I think it's just called Silk Roads. He has the guy that does this book. He has two of them. One of them is called The Silk Roads, and the other one is called The New Silk Roads. And the new one is about the modern day Silk Road, like what is like the modern day epicenter of trade. And the point that he's making in that is that it's all going to go back to Asia. Like everything is like because right now all these Asian like powers are buying up corporations in America. Like I forget which corporations. Dude, I was like listening to this on the phone. I listened to these audiobooks and I'm falling asleep. And I was listening to this new Silk Roads one, and it was just freaking me the fuck out, man. Because it's like China, like I don't know if it's I don't know if these are the ones that were bought. Like I would have to like go back and listen again. But it's like every major corporation is being bought up by foreign entities right now, and they're all foreign entities in Asia.
Oh
But
yeah.
so anyway, so yeah, it's called The Silk Roads by Peter Frankopan, and it's pretty good, man.
Okay.
And so also, yeah, are you familiar with the Sikh religion?
Yeah. I've met a few Sikhs in my day. Yeah, we haven't had someone on the podcast to talk about that religion yet, but I plan on it. Yeah, it's fascinating.
Dude, I mean, I'll definitely tune in for that one because so every now and again, as I'm studying things on the Silk Road, they'll explain something. I have to like stop and then go read about that thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
So right now, I'm trying to get into Sikhism because like that was like caused by the blending of other religions in a certain area. Like it came out of the Fertile Crescent, but it wasn't. It was like Buddhism. Like it was like the combination of like Buddhism and Hinduism and something else created Sikhism,
Mm.
or rather, the gurus, the Hindu gurus, realized that they had to start training and militarizing, and but they needed to do it in an honorable way. That's why they all carry like that the sword, the knife,
Mm.
and they have to wear those rings that they wear. And yeah, I'm ruining this for sure, but it was like because Sikhism is passed down through gurus, and the first guru that militarized the Sikhs is accredited with like creating the Sikh religion, and that's basically what it is. It's just like being honorable and like sticking up for injustices and shit like that. It's pretty neat.
Wow. Yeah, I love doing that, and I gotta give you credit on, Stoner Dads. You guys do that where you'll mention something, and I'll stop the podcast, and I'm gonna, I'm looking into it. And I'm like, oh shit, and then I comment like, yeah, you guys got that right, but there was something you left out, and then I go back and delete the comment because I'm like, oh, I sound like an asshole. But no, I love it. I pulled
Yeah.
this book off my shelf. Maybe you'll be interested in it once you get through this one. This is a classic. It was written a while ago by a man named Sir John Mandeville, and it's his adventures in along the Silk Road, and he talks about meeting the Great Khan in China, and he talks about like the Mongols in a sort of mythical way, and it's just like it's a funny book because at the time the goal wasn't to be like totally historical. It was probably to tell a story. So he was mixing fact and fable together. But I'm a little bit skeptical towards what's fable and what's reality. So sometimes I read into some of these things a little too literally, but we're approaching the top of the second hour here, Sidney. I really want to thank you for your time spent with me today. And yeah, folks who haven't tuned in yet, Stoner Dads, Two Jack Bros, you're a comedian, so people can go and check you out. You have road dates, I assume. Anything else that you want to plug? Anything else that I should leave in the episode description for people to follow up on?
Yeah, no, mostly it's just like I really want people to check out Two Jack Bros. That's one of my, one of the goals that we had was to first get it established into something that we felt lucky that we were a part of. We've done that, and now step two is to get it out to the people that can get something from it. I mean, because comedy is anything that I'm a part of. Comedy is going to be the overarching arc of it all. Like I'm a comedian. I want people to laugh and have a good time. But some of the messages that we get back from people that like watch or listen to Two Jack Bros really do touch my heart, and it just like I get a great sense of just feeling so very lucky that I get to be a part of that type of impact for another person. So I would like to feel more of that because it feels really good.
Well, I'll tell you what. I said it at the beginning and I'll say it again. Listening to Two Jack Bros makes me want to be a better partner to my girlfriend. So I love it. And yeah, I'll keep listening. I noticed you guys hadn't put an episode out in a few weeks, and then I saw one came out 2 days ago. So I was glad to see that. I'm glad you guys are still pumping out episodes.
Yeah, and I will say this too. I wanna be very clear about this because if we miss an episode of Stoner Dads, people want to bite our heads off. But dude, people are very understanding. The Two Jack Bros fan base is very understanding, and honestly, they probably too understanding because we shouldn't be missing episodes of that. But I want to thank you guys for being so sweet about it. Yeah.
Well, I love it. I mean, there's such a backlog for me because I found your content relatively recently. I've enjoyed, I've listened to every episode of Stoner Dadz, so it's been great to go back and listen to old episodes of Two Jack Bros. So I got a bunch of episodes to burn through if you guys aren't putting out new ones. But yeah, stick to once a week,
Yeah.
At the very least.
Can I say this for those of you, if you want to check out Two Jack Bros, and if you want to get familiar with Stoner Dads, episode 193, that was the episode when we switched to the current interview format. We used to not be this format. So episode 193 is Matt McCusker. Episode 194 is Tim Butterly, and that is who I do Stoner Dads with. And I again, like when we designed the podcast, we were designing it like with like how can we draw the most out of like some of our more ridiculous friends. And Matt and Tim and of course Shane were the three people that I had in mind when I was like designing it. And 193, 194, that is a great introduction into what we do with Two Jack Bros.
I love it. Yeah, that was one of the first episodes I listened to was McCusker. He's been on this show way back when. He was so kind to join me when I only had 25 episodes out. I think he was episode 26 of this podcast. And I enjoyed listening to your first interview with Rainey too, because Mike is...
Oh my God.
He is always a trip, some of his stories.
Yeah. So that's a very good point. So the first like 5 or 6 episodes were with all of my comedy friends that I've known for over a decade. Right. And I wanted to get the momentum of doing it with them so that when I was doing it with people I didn't know, I would stick to the same way I was doing it with people I did know.
Yeah. Well,
and yeah, go ahead.
I don't mean to interrupt you, but you just struck me, and I want you to convey this to your friends if you can. I used to listen to a lot of garbage comedy podcasts that I cannot listen to anymore because the authenticity that you demonstrate and the guys that you podcast with, a lot of people say, oh, it's the Philly crew, but there's guys in New York that you guys work with too. And it's really just your vibe, like the vibe that you and the podcasters and comedians you work with. It's too much to turn back to that fake stuff. I've gotten so much of a dose of like what real comedy is that I'm not going to put any shade on any podcast, but yeah, there's shows that I used to listen to that I'm like, oh my God, how could I have sat through that for an hour in comparison? Yeah. So I that's just something I want to say. I'm very grateful that you guys are real, and you don't,
Thank you.
Yeah.
And I always say this because I want to give the secret away. Because we really do love each other. We really do want the best for each other. Like, do you know what I mean? Like,
right.
we're not competing with each other. We really truly believe in a rising tide raises all ships. And we believe that before Shane got SNL and started to get famous and started to, and as soon as that happened, it was just like there was no aspect of Shane moving forward that happened without his voice. You know, like every time he ticked forward even a little bit, he pushed us a little bit further. So that that is kind of I think that's an aspect that luckily brought us all together because we all had that same belief. And it's not hard to have, man. It's not hard to get past. Like, yeah, you're gonna be like I get excited when there's something that when something happens to one of my friends that I get a little jealous for. I get excited about that because that jealousy isn't true jealousy; it's inspiration. It's like I'm jealous that Mike Rainey has this cool book called On Perks out right now that people are buying up and people are getting the audio book of. It's a beautiful, vulnerable book that he put out right there. And the reason why I'm jealous of it is because I'm jealous of his motivation to do it. I'm jealous that he did it. I'm not jealous that he has a product out that he's getting recognition for. I am so happy for that because now all that darkness that he went through wasn't for nothing, you know, and he's able to help shine light on other people with that. But at the end of the day, man, if I didn't have friends that I was like, that I was a little bit jealous of, like I couldn't imagine finding as much worth in my life.
Wow. Yeah, well said, man. I think it's a testament how popular your shows are to how real you guys are because, you know, people listen to podcasts and they get this parasocial feeling of being friends and your shows that you guys do, you feel like you're one of the guys listening to it. And I hope that continues to grow and escalate. I hope it doesn't get out of control. And I hope you guys continue to love, and share that love with others because that's really what it comes down to. I mean, this show, we try to bring that love into conversations with people like yourself who've walked a road less traveled and maybe are seen as black sheep in some people's eyes or maybe seen as, crazy to others who just don't get them. So I really appreciate this conversation, Sidney. For everyone listening, please do go and tune in, subscribe, wherever you're listening to this, go and subscribe to Two Jack Bros. Sidney and Ainsley talking about everything that you have heard about on this show with comedians. It's fun. They go through the chakras. You learn a little bit about metaphysics and what it means to be human, and you laugh along the way. So go in and support them. And while you're at it, smoke a bowl with Stoner Dadz once a week. I'm on the Patreon. You should sign up there too. But until next time, folks, thank you for tuning in and enjoy the moment wherever you are in the now.